check. Test.
Good morning. Once again.
So good to see you yesterday.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
This is our meeting, huh?
Yes.
It's a big wish for you, and this is our
Yes, certainly. Certainly.
Thank you.
Hello, test mic. Hello, test mic.
doing?
¿Sabes dónde están? Las dejé.
So I was after you left to actually move to Asia to work with Hao Liang to promote the investment
really?
for SDG in Asia. So we created this initiative.
I have only one. I left my.
Thank you, good.
The last one.
This is the last one.
And we'll just take a photo then.
Yes, take a
Take a
photo.
picture. Take a picture because we'll sell it to the Unity guys and tell them, you know. Okay.
So good to see
My
you
pleasure,
again.
my pleasure. And,
Thank you for hiring me.
no, you deserve it. You were the best candidate, so I have no trust. I have no trust. No, you're the best candidate, definitely. Let's keep in touch. Then I travel to, I'll let you know. I'll call you and come and see you. Okay, my pleasure. Don't worry. Okay, I'll listen to you, man. I will no worry. Also for a French voter, he sits first.
Te la puedo llevar antes, pero si no, 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 que el doctor Mundo termina 2 horas antes, 12.
Thank you.
Tienes tiempo, 2 horas para
Should I announce we're starting?
Good morning, everyone. If you could please take your seats, we will get started in just one moment. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Ministerial and Business Executives Roundtable. I'm Courtney Fingar, and I'm very pleased to be the moderator for this session. And there are a lot of important topics being discussed these days at the World Investment Forum. This is probably among the more urgent, and that is because despite the title of the session being Promoting Sustainable Investment in Structurally Weak and Vulnerable Economies, not all of the economies represented around this table are necessarily structurally weak, but they're certainly vulnerable. And at such a difficult time in the global economy, and at a time when foreign direct investment flows are facing downward pressure from a number of crises that are hitting all at once, we have to be extremely mindful if we are to try to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals that vulnerable economies get their fair share of FDI, and that they are able to deploy the strategies necessary to safeguard their economies. And so what we put in this category of countries include developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. And they all face maybe slightly different challenges, but there are many in common, and that's what we will discuss today. This session is organized, of course, through UNCTAD, but in collaborations with the appropriate UN entity for this group of countries, and that's the UN Office of the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States. So I'm very pleased to say that the co-chairs and I suppose hosts of this session are Rebecca Greenspan, the Secretary General of UNCTAD, and Rabab Fatima, who's the High Representative for the office I just mentioned. So for our order of events, we will have some opening remarks in just one moment from our two co-chairs and hosts, and then we will go around the table and we will hear the headline thoughts of each of our esteemed representatives, who I will introduce to you in turn. And then very importantly, we will have a dialogue. So I would ask that you keep your interventions, if you can, to the prescribed few minutes, and that will allow us to have a better opportunity to have a proper discussion afterwards. But first, I'm very pleased to introduce and invite to make her comments Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UNCTAD.
Thank you very much, Courtney, and thank you for being with us. And I want to greet very warmly Rabab Fatima, the High Representative for LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS of the United Nations. Rabab, thank you for being here with us. And really, she's a great leader and a very good friend, so we are honored to have her here with us. And it's an honor to welcome you all today to this Ministerial and Business Executive Roundtable for Structurally Weak and Vulnerable Economies. I would like really to begin thanking also all of you for being here, my colleagues from the rest of the UN system that are here with us. ILO, thank you so much for being here. And also the Technology Center, TEF, thank you for being here with us. For the least developed countries, this meeting will be a first occasion after the adoption of the Doha Program of Action to discuss implementation of its mandate in the area of international investment. So I hope that today's discussion will fit into next year's 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States in Antigua and Barbuda, and the 3rd United Nations Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries in Rwanda. And here we will follow your leadership, dear Rabab. Before yielding the floor, allow me to share some numbers to put this discussion in context. The world's most vulnerable economies simply cannot meet their sustainable development goals without considerable foreign direct investment. However, recent UNCTAD data shows that international investment flows to the 84 structurally weak, vulnerable, and small economies declined in 2022 by over 4%. So FDI to the LDCs, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states combined amount only to $41 billion, less than 3.2% of the world total, for a population that represents 17% of the world, 1.4 billion people. What is worse, this level of investment was about the same we had 10 years ago. So really, you know, what we said at the beginning of this forum, that we had a divergence, yes? In the aggregates, things don't look very bad, but in the distributional part, things still look very divergent, very asymmetric, very bad. So the sustainability funds, for example, that are growing, and we gave the number of $6 trillion in sustainable development funds, are not getting to the rest of the world. They are getting concentrated in the developed world. We agree that the developed world has to make a huge transformation in terms of emissions and the contribution that they have to give to the world. But the problem is that the rest of the developing world, with the exception probably of the emerging economies, are doing very badly in terms of funds coming in. And in many cases, what we have is negative flows, between the North and the South with respect to investment, but also to capital flows in general. Even in the World Bank, if you read the second report that was launched in Marrakesh, in the meeting of the World Bank and the IMF, if you read the report on the all the network of development banks, the flow already zero. So the capital that our countries need for development and for the transformation are not getting there. These low levels of investment contrast sharply, and we will hear from you, yes, with significant efforts made by many governments across this group of countries to strengthen the regulatory and legal frameworks and facilitate investment. And we will hear from the private sector if this is so. But we know that the private sector needs rules of the game that are stable, that they need a legal framework, that they need a regulatory framework for the national conditions to be there to attract foreign investment. But we think that these countries have made a huge effort to have those frameworks in place. Many of these countries have been dynamic reformers, creating better conditions for investment and private sector development. They opened up new sectors and activities for foreign investment, enhanced investment protection guarantees, created new investment promotion agencies, and investment support mechanisms. It is frustrating to these governments, and frankly to us, that these measures are so far not bearing fruit as much as one would hope. The reality is that others must do their part too, and change the game in the development finance system itself. This is something in which UNCTAD is also very involved. I just came back from Marrakesh, as I said before, where we had the IMF and World Bank annual meetings. Interesting things were discussed, I think, in this framework. But what it was clear to all of us is something that we really said in the policy brief that the Secretary General launched with respect to the reform of the financial system, that the international financial system we have is too small for the challenge we face. And we know we need the private sector to complement, but also we need to scale up the support for the international financial system institutions. The numbers that we give, let me share them with you again, is that the World Bank is today 1/5 of what it was in the 60s with respect to the global economy, 1/5. And that's why our agenda says that we need a multilateral financial system that is bigger and better. We need both. And we are talking only about making them better, but not about making them bigger. And for our world, we need both at the same time. The other indicator that I want to give you that is striking is that the IMF can provide in crisis liquidity in a year what central banks of the developed countries trade in one day in QE. Yes? That is the proportion. And if you look at the liquidity that the IMF gave in the 3 years of COVID, yes, we have the number of a swap between the Federal Reserve and the European Bank that in 1 year gave liquidity to Europe as much as the whole liquidity that the IMF gave our countries in 3 years. Yeah, so the the safety net, the financial safety net of the world is fragmented. So you have these swap arrangements between the developed countries that is very good. It gives stability to the world. So we don't want to get rid of it, but what we want is to be more inclusive, to have a global safety net that will allow all of us to be part of it. So also the IMF, and there is a very interesting interview in the Financial Times of Kristalina Georgieva saying precisely this, that the system is still, has been left to be too small for what we want. So all of these issues are connected, yes? As the multilateral development banks underinvest, there is no private capital to crowd into the big infrastructure projects the energy transition requires, for example, despite effort at the supply side on project preparation. As emergency liquidity is too often lacking, countries are forced into ever more expensive debt. And as debt amounts, they crowd out development spending and investment, and so the gap gets wider and the money does not flow where it has to flow. So an important theme of this forum is the energy transition, but we must be mindful that hundreds of millions still live without access to electricity, particularly in Africa. And without access to finance, these countries will have no option but to turn to worst sources of fuel. The following 3 years will be key to ensure that another greener road is taken instead. To date, UNCTAD has worked with governments and other investment stakeholders in over 50 structurally weak and vulnerable economies. But we need to join forces in delivering our support. I am therefore proud that we have implemented the first multi-agency program aimed at strengthening investment promotion in LDCs. And we have done this together with OHR LLS, thank you so much again, ILO, thank you so much again, and UNIDO and the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, and the Enhanced Integrated Framework. We established a six-month course for senior executives, and we already have trained 60 officials from 20 LDCs that have so far graduated from this course. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, together we have the knowledge, resources, and tools to drive change and sustainable development in the world's most vulnerable economies. Our meeting today is more than just a gathering, it is a call to action, a recognition of the challenge we face, an opportunity to address them collectively, because here in this forum, we are present, all the stakeholders that need to be here, yes? There is the private sector in different forms, there is the policymakers, there is the parliamentarians, there is the international organizations. So we need the voice of all of you to try to find the solutions to go forward. So the undeniable truth is that as a global community, we have an ethical and moral obligation to ensure that no nation, regardless of its size, geographical location, or economic stature, is left behind. It is both a matter of justice and testament to our shared commitment to forging a more equitable and prosperous world. So I look forward to hearing your deliberation and perspectives, and I hope that the summary of this session will fit into the other processes that are being held in the year to come, and that can enhance the solutions and the voice to make change possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for starting us out on the right path, for giving us an idea in the context of the scale of the challenges, but also potential remedies. And now I would like to invite Her Excellency High Representative Rabab Fatima to offer your viewpoint.
Thank you very much, Courtney. Secretary General of UNCTAD, my very dear friend, Rebecca Greenspan, honorable ministers, excellencies, distinguished colleagues and partners, dear friends. I'm delighted to join Rebecca to welcome you to this Ministerial and Business Executive Roundtable. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Secretary General of UNCTAD and her very able team for their collaboration and partnership with my office to host this important meeting. And we deeply value our partnership with UNCTAD and with many of you around the table. So it's wonderful to be here. Excellencies, my office supports the world's 92 most vulnerable countries, the 46 least developed countries, the 32 landlocked developing countries, and the 37 small island developing states. Together, they're home to 1.3 billion people. Rebecca has highlighted some very, very important issues and points and where things stand, but let me reiterate a few issues. For all these countries, foreign direct investment is critically important to not only recover from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and other overlapping global crises, but also to ensure sustainable growth and development. FDI, we all agree, can be a critical source of capital, paving the way for improved infrastructure and technology transfer, increasing productivity, creating new jobs, and enhancing the ability of these countries to access higher value-added products and services. However, recent FDI trends in these countries have been mixed. Collectively, from figures from UNCTAD and other partners, we see that collectively they require more than $281 billion of FDI annually for the rest of the decade in order to get back on track and to achieve some of their SDGs. But last year, they were only able to attract just 1/6 of that amount. While some of these countries may have experienced some growth in FDI, others have faced declines, with the overall, as I said, overall FDI landscape remaining much below pre-pandemic levels. FDI inflows to LDCs declined by 16% in 2022, and this was a significant reduction in the already limited FDI going to these countries, as I have just mentioned. While in certain sectors FDI may have increased, especially in 2022, gaps remain in some of the priority areas such as transportation and the digital economy. We need both global and country-specific strategies to change the situation. While each of these groups have unique challenges, they share common problems to harness the benefits of FDI to accelerate growth and to achieve the SDGs. For instance, the LDCs, LLDCs, and the SIDS have specific challenges in diversifying FDIs away from the extractive or other sectors that contribute adversely to climate change. And in the long run, such FDIs may exacerbate their pre-existing vulnerabilities, making them more exposed to the effects of climate change. Lack of FDI in critical infrastructure is also a matter of concern across all three groups of these countries. A limited number of road networks and ports, further compounded by underdeveloped communication networks and digital infrastructure, constitute a serious bottleneck for them. The growing digital divide is another common challenge that these countries are facing. At this moment, a staggering 720 million people living in the LDCs, the least developed countries, do not have internet access. And in the LLDCs, the landlocked developing countries, 6 in 10 people, that is 60% of the population, are also not online. In the SIDS, about 1/3 of the population is still offline. So limited connectivity and usage also seriously hamper the ability of these countries to connect with international markets, constituting a barrier for investment and hindering their structural transformation. Excellencies, as Secretary General Rebecca Greenspan has also mentioned, there is clearly a need for targeted initiatives and enhanced international collaboration to bridge these gaps. And we must support these countries to create an enabling environment to attract and utilize FDIs to foster sustainable development. And I'm very pleased to see that we have many of our countries around the table today, and we'd like to hear from them also about how we can do that. Allow me to share a few specific points in this regard. First, there is an urgent need to channel investments into sectors aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically renewable energy, infrastructure, industrialization, sustainable agriculture, and education. Increasing investments in these SDGs-aligned sectors is critical, as they can address the core development needs of these countries. They can drive economic growth and social development, helping to create a sustainable pathway towards shared prosperity and a more resilient, inclusive future. Secondly, Excellencies, we need to tap into emerging sectors, agribusiness, ICT, renewable energy, and local input-intensive manufacturing are areas of opportunities across these three groups of countries. We must also support increasing access to the necessary skills that enable these countries to attract investment, and I'm very happy to see Mia Seppo here from ILO in these areas. I think that's also very critically important. They have a demographic dividend. It's now how we can actually harness that capacity into productive capacity, including through creating more effective platforms for peer-to-peer learning and experience sharing. I think that's also very, very important. Thirdly, as Rebecca also mentioned, there'll be two once-in-a-decade opportunities that are coming up in 2024. And these are the third United Nations Conference on the Landlocked Developing Countries and the fourth UN Conference on the Small Island Developing States. They'll be held next May and next June, respectively, in Kigali, the Landlocked Countries Conference, and in Antigua and Barbuda, St. John's, for the sixth conference. And these conferences will be meeting to agree on concrete actionable targets and commitments to support these two groups of countries, including, very importantly, for attracting FDIs. These two conferences will also bring together all relevant stakeholders, and I'm very happy to see some of the partners around the table, including, very importantly, the private sector, and afford opportunities to launch new partnerships for business and investment. And we are already working to see how we can get together all the the private sector also in the business leaders forums in both these meetings. And I look forward to your continued support as we build momentum towards new programs of actions for the LLDCs and the SIDS to be adopted in these two conferences with specific targets, commitments, and deliverables to boost FDI. Finally, Excellencies, we are meeting here for the first time since the Doha LDC conference. And as you are aware, that the Doha Program of Action for the LDCs, which was adopted at the conference, put renewed emphasis on scaling up investment in LDCs to achieve the SDGs. Recognizing that sustainable business investment is yet to be sufficiently mobilized in the LDCs, the Doha Program of Action envisages establishing an international investment support center for the least developed countries to support them with FDI promotion. This center for LDCs could help attract more foreign investment, and in collaboration with relevant UN entities, including UNCTAD and other relevant stakeholders, especially from the private sector, support enhanced collaboration and partnership between foreign investors and local businesses. We have had a good round of consultations on this deliverable, I believe, day before yesterday, and some of you actually participated there, and we were very pleased to see the interest that is there for this very important initiative, and I hope that will come into fruition in the coming days. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, mobilizing impactful FDI can play a crucial role to drive structural transformation, bridge the gap in development financing, and create new opportunities for businesses and jobs in the LDCs, LLDCs, and the SIDS. And to move forward this agenda, we will require a concerted multi-stakeholder effort from the international community, and I'm very pleased and I'm looking forward very much to listening to the honorable ministers and other partners here, so that if you'd like to hear also from them about their thoughts on this. And I look forward to working very closely with my dear friend here, UNCTAD, ILO, and others around the table as we further harness the potential that investment can bring to the world's most vulnerable countries. Let me rest it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're quite struck by some of the staggering and alarming statistics you shared. And I think it highlights the importance of what we're talking about here when we're thinking of it's small countries usually, but 92 economies and 1.2 billion people. It couldn't be more important than that. So having heard the perspective and the work that UNCTAD and Her Excellency Fatima's office is doing to tackle this challenge along with partners such as ILO and others, we will now turn our attention to esteemed representatives and ministers from countries that are affected, as well as representatives of the private sector without whom no progress will be possible. So I will introduce and invite in turn those around the roundtable, and again ask you to give us your headline thoughts on the subject briefly if possible, and then we will get into a discussion. I will start first with His Excellency Musa Gafela, Minister of Trade and Industry of Botswana.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And let me recognize Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am quite honored to be a part of this discussion. My name's Musi Gafela, Minister of Trade and Industry in the Republic of Botswana. And thank you very much, Madam Under Secretary, Ms. Fatima, for your insightful words. I fully associate myself with her sentiments. And what I would like to say is that, yes, there are challenges, and certainly there are also opportunities in the structurally weak and vulnerable economies. One of the major challenges which we immediately see we find in lack of access to or shortage of access to finance, sustainable finance, challenges with respect to connectivity, infrastructure, transportation linkages, challenges with regards to reliable supply of energy. Those are some of the major challenges which we find. And governments across the world, especially in developing countries, are all in pursuit of connectivity. In Botswana, for instance, we are no exception. We found it very important to link the southern part of Africa and the northern part by way of the likes of the construction of the Mosetse-Kazungula infrastructure, the Trans-Kalahari Road, and the Mamabula-Lephalale rail linkage, all of which are a linkage between the south and the north, because we have the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, whose objective is to link the whole of Africa and improve intra-Africa trade. So more important than ever before, that linkages should be there for our tradesmen and tradeswomen to access the north, the south, east, and the west, all of the markets in Africa. Political stability is also very important, especially populations which are small, such as those of Botswana, where we are sitting at about 2.3 million. Nations of such populations themselves often are not an attractive market, but because of the stability of the government, the stability, the discipline, the fiscal discipline, and its reliability, it is a springboard from which to access the greater African markets, a place at which an investor can feel safe and rest comfortable that the investment would not be yanked off their hand or be put to any kind of prejudice. So those are some of the considerations which are quite important in any developing country, that they should be trusted if an investment is to be considered to be placed within that land. And I can speak for our country, Botswana, that we look at the feedback that we get from across the world. And we are quite considered highly as a reliable nation. No record, no precedent of disturbance of an investment when it shall have landed in the country. So it's absolutely important. It's not only a single country whose political landscape should be stable. The neighbors too. It's very important that they too should be stable, because if an investor invests in Botswana and they seek, he or she seeks to access markets in distant countries up Africa, it should be safe to access those markets, although based in Botswana. If those environments are not safe, then it becomes quite a challenge for an investor to really be properly settled in a country such as Botswana. Another aspect which we need to look into is consistency of regulations. It's quite important that regulation in country A should be consistent with regulation in country B in order to make the cost of doing business to be brought down. If regulations are inconsistent, it can really add to, it can make an additional obstacle or a stump in the process of trying to trade as an investor in any country. So that too is very important, and if possible, as little regulation as there can be. Yes, we come historically a long way as nations which trade is free. There's freedom of trade, but it has to be regulated, of course, for the benefit and for the safety of consumers. But that too, it should be measured. If it is to be regulated, it should be done in a moderate way to avoid it becoming so costly. Often the feedback that we receive as politicians is that trade has become so expensive, although it is free, made expensive by the multiple regulations which are added onto the whole process of trading. Our legal systems must also be stable. It should be predictable as to what the outcomes of litigations are going to be, because trade is risky in itself. It's inherent in it is conflict. So the legal systems of the country should be also quite reliable, and the laws must be, and regulations must be made transparent, access to which must be done with ease. Access to information must be something which governments should pursue, so that things are not left to difficulty with which to access them. So these are the highlights which I think I could share from speaking as a politician and a lawmaker and a decision maker at present, a cabinet member. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, yes, thank you. We were due to have Her Excellency Lupao Lama, Minister of Trade, Industry, and SMEs for the Republic of Guinea. Unfortunately, Her Excellency was called back to the capital on urgent business, but I'm delighted to say that she has a representative here to read her statement on her behalf, and that's Ms. Diana Koyate, Managing Director of the Guinea Private Investment Promotion Agency.
Bonjour à tous, donc je suis Diana Kouyate, la directrice générale de l'Agence de promotion des investissements privés à PIB Guinée. Mesdames et messieurs les ministres, Madame la secrétaire générale, Madame Rebecca Grispan, Madame la sous-secrétaire générale, Madame Rabab Fatima, permettez-moi de prendre la parole au nom de Madame la ministre qui a souhaité que je lise son allocution compte tenu de ses impératifs liés à son retour en Guinée. Donc, au nom de Madame la ministre, c'est un réel plaisir de prendre la parole à l'occasion de cette importante table ronde pour échanger avec vous sur les défis et les opportunités liés aux investissements dans nos économies et de leur implication pour la République de Guinée. Sous la conduite éclairée de son Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, chef de l'État, le colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, la Guinée s'est dotée d'un programme de référence intérimaire pour la période 2022-2025. Ce plan de développement économique et social sous la transition est décliné suivant 5 axes de la feuille de route du gouvernement qui sont la rectification institutionnelle, le cadre macroéconomique et financier, le cadre légal et la gouvernance, l'action sociale, l'emploi et l'employabilité. Mesdames, vous l'avez mentionné tout à l'heure dans votre intervention, les infrastructures, la connectivité et l'assainissement, Et bien sûr, vous noterez l'adéquation de ces axes d'intervention avec les objectifs de développement durable. Les opportunités d'investissement explorées en République de Guinée sont nombreuses. Pays minier par excellence, notre gouvernement vient de relancer le projet de minerai de fer de Simandou, évalué à 15 milliards de dollars, composé de l'extraction du minerai de fer, de la construction d'un port en eau profonde, mais aussi de la construction d'un chemin de fer transfrontalier de 650 km qui va traverser toute la Guinée. Outre le minerai de fer, la Guinée est le deuxième producteur mondial de bauxite, son principal produit d'exportation. Par ailleurs, des projets de raffinerie sont en cours de développement pour transformer localement la bauxite en aluminium. Si l'exploitation minière reste pour le moment le moteur de l'économie guinéenne, d'autres secteurs attirent également les investissements, surtout en lien avec le développement durable. Au cours de la dernière décennie, ce sont plus de 2 milliards de dollars qui ont été investis dans la construction de grands barrages hydroélectriques et de projets d'interconnexion, assurant ainsi l'électrification du pays. Avec un potentiel de 6 200 MW d'énergie hydroélectrique et un fort potentiel d'énergie éolien et solaire, la Guinée se positionne comme un producteur, mais aussi un exportateur majeur d'énergie durable dans les décennies à venir. Les infrastructures routières se multiplient dans tout le pays, facilitant ainsi le transport des personnes et des marchandises. L'extension du port autonome de Conakry de 89 hectares et son fonctionnement en continu justifient son rang de premier port d'Afrique de l'Ouest en termes de performance selon les classements 2022 et 2023 de la Banque mondiale. Le gouvernement a également mis en place d'importantes incitations fiscales pour la construction de logements sociaux, véritable défi pour environ 14 000 de Guinéens, et a dédié une agence de financement à cet effet. Le secteur agricole, qui emploie 59% de la population, est l'une des priorités du gouvernement. C'est dans ce cadre que le budget alloué au ministère de l'Agriculture et de l'Élevage a triplé, passant de 70 millions de dollars à plus de 200 millions de dollars en 2022 et 2023. Aussi, sur la période 2020-2026, plus de 140 millions de dollars ont été injectés par la Banque mondiale pour le développement de l'agro-industrie et aider le pays à tirer parti de ses 13,9 millions d'hectares de terres arables et de ses 1165 cours d'eau. Un dernier secteur qui connaît une forte hausse d'intérêt est le tourisme. Avec ses sites naturels, sa faune et sa flore uniques, la Guinée est une destination d'attraction touristique. Et c'est dans ce cadre que les compagnies aériennes telles qu'Emirates, Air France, mais aussi Turkish ou encore Ethiopian Airlines et des dizaines d'autres ont récemment étendu leur présence dans le pays. Aussi, le projet de partenariat public-privé, Sogia qui est une structure publique et Albara qui est une structure privée, un projet de 200 millions de dollars a été lancé pour la modernisation mais aussi l'extension de l'aéroport international Ahmed Sékou Touré de Conakry. Ce projet permettra notamment d'augmenter la capacité de 500 000 à 3 millions de passagers d'ici 2025. Avec 6 pays limitrophes et ses 33 km de côte maritime, la position géographique de la Guinée est un atout pour les opportunités d'investissement. Surtout en particulier dans le contexte de la zone de libre-échange continentale africain, ZLECAf. Au regard de ces avantages comparatifs notoires, nous souhaitons aujourd'hui attirer d'autres profils d'investisseurs hors mine. C'est dans ce cadre que la République de Guinée co-organise avec la Banque africaine de développement, la BAD, et la Société financière internationale, la AFC, du groupe de la Banque mondiale, la 3e édition du Guinea Investment Forum pour les initiés GIF 3, qui se tiendra les 5-6 mars 2024 à Conakry. Il vise notamment à favoriser la signature d'accords de financement et de partenariat en faveur des structures publiques, mais aussi privées. Mesdames et messieurs, à l'instar des autres pays les moins avancés, la République de Guinée affronte des défis en termes de connaissance ou de perception du pays par les investisseurs étrangers ou encore de garantie à l'investissement. Pour relever ces défis, le gouvernement guinéen offre des incitations fiscales, douanières et des garanties aux investisseurs à travers son code des investissements, mais aussi par la mise en place d'un tribunal de commerce. Par ailleurs, on peut citer aussi d'autres réformes qui contribuent justement à promouvoir les investissements, notamment l'opérationnalisation des guichets uniques pour la création d'entreprises, pour l'obtention du permis de construire et pour l'accélération des procédures d'importation et d'exportation. la digitalisation et la sécurisation des titres fonciers pour faciliter l'accès aux terres, et enfin la mise à disposition de 44 hectares pour la construction de logements sociaux, ainsi que l'exonération des droits fiscaux et douaniers pour le financement de ces travaux. Mesdames et messieurs, afin de pérenniser ces actions, vous les avez mentionnées, mesdames les secrétaires générales, et accroître l'attraction des investissements privés en Guinée, d'autres solutions sont en cours d'élaboration avec l'appui de nos partenaires, notamment l'adoption de réformes pour rendre le climat des affaires encore plus attractif, l'appui au secteur privé pour en faire le socle de l'économie guinéenne, l'accompagnement à la mise en place d'incitations additionnelles à l'investissement, la mobilisation de garanties pour accompagner le financement de projets en partenariat public-privé, et enfin, le financement des études de faisabilité pour aider à la mobilisation de fonds pour la réalisation de projets publics et de partenariats public-privé d'envergure. Mesdames et messieurs, la participation de la République de Guinée à cette table ronde de haut niveau est d'ailleurs l'occasion d'appeler à l'accompagnement des partenaires au développement dans la réalisation de ces ambitieux projets. Je termine en remerciant les autorités des Émirats arabes unis au nom de Madame la ministre du Commerce, de l'Industrie et des PME pour avoir facilité notre participation à ce forum de l'investissement. Mes remerciements vont également à l'endroit de la PNUSED, donc Madame la secrétaire générale, et aussi au bureau de la haute représentante Madame Rabab Fatima pour avoir mis en place cette plateforme d'échange d'expériences sur les défis de développement économique durable auxquels nos États sont confrontés et sur les propositions de réponses appropriées. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. And now we will hear from the Deputy Minister of Planning and Investment of Laos. That's Her Excellency Ponvan Altavong. And please, deep apologies if I have mispronounced your name. You will have a chance to correct it for everyone if I did.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. You pronounce my name correctly. Excellencies, Madam Chairs, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my gratitude for inviting me to contribute my insight on behalf of Lao PDR and to learn from these valuable exchanges today. As a least developed and landlocked country, we face significant challenges in creating a conducive business environment that attracts investment necessary to achieve our development goals and priorities. Therefore, I appreciate this important forum as it focuses on addressing the challenges we face by countries in similar contexts and to facilitate both towards shared solutions, especially in light of our current progress being off track towards sustainable development goals, as mentioned by our Excellencies, Chairs and Co-Chair. Earlier this year, I had the privilege to attend the LDC5 conference, where we discussed how we could implement the Doha Program of Action for LDCs. The DPOA highlights that public investment alone will not be sufficient to reach our targets. To succeed, we must involve the private sector, attract more responsible investors, as well as quality investment. And we effectively address rural development and poverty eradication, climate change, and environmental declaration. As we progress towards our anticipated graduation from LDC status in 2026, we are witnessing transformative investment that enhance our regional connectivity, exemplified by recently operational Lao-China high-speed railway. These developments open up new investment, trading, and tourism opportunity for us. Nevertheless, we acknowledge the need for increased efforts to fully capitalize on this potential during this critical transition period. So please allow me to take this opportunity to highlight some of the steps we have taken to unlock these potential opportunities. Our development priorities are encapsulated in our 9 national plan for the period of 21-25. We also have a smooth transition strategy for LDC graduation, as I mentioned in meetings yesterday and the day before yesterday, which is now nearing completion. We have developed the 9 financing strategy to support the implementation of our national plan. We've outlined 54 actions to optimize the utilization of public resources and attract potential private investment and other sources. It also identifies our challenges, for example, some outdated legal and regulatory frameworks that have struggled to keep pace with the rapid development of new sectors and ways of not being business as unusual, created uncertainty for potential investors and can lead to missed opportunities. To tackle these challenges, the strategy also focuses on key actions to enhance FDI, as mentioned by Excellencies. International FDI is critical for our development. Improved governance and regulation for private investment, including PPP, and also integrating them with rural development and poverty eradication. Job creation, climate change, and regional development with an aim to reduce development gaps within urban and rural areas. By implementing the action of financing strategy, we hope to open up new investment opportunities in national priority sectors, particularly agro-businesses, including sectors that will support the transition to a green and circular economy, such as electronic vehicles, sustainable forestry, and carbon markets. I am delighted to announce that our carbon market strategy is in progress, and we hope to present it at the upcoming COP28 summit. However, realizing these ambitions will require support from our international organization and development partners. Although we are committed to achieve SDGs, our resources are stretched thin. Limitation of infrastructure and technical capacities are often constrained. LAPDR remains committed to meeting its nationally determined contribution or NDCs and attaining net zero emission by 2050. We collaborated with various development partners such as UN System, Multilateral Development Bank, and others to strengthen our national MRV system. This ensures compliance with requirements of the Paris Agreement and helps identify opportunities for rapid decarbonization. Yet, accessing climate finance remains challenging due to stringent requirements that impede the implementation of initiatives, including the costs and risks. As emphasized at the recent SDG summit in New York, we require immediate boisterous support from our development partners in order to accomplish the goals that LDC committed to our national plan, including LAPDR. With the opportunities at our fingertips, I am confident that by fostering collaboration and also continuous support from international organizations, development partners, private sector, we could achieve our goals and targets and especially for those, still facing challenges. I thank you very much for having this, opportunity, and Madam Chairs, Co-Chairs, and Excellencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we will hear from the Minister for Investment Promotion of Togo, and that's Her Excellency Manuela Santos.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I would like to thank the entire UNCTAD team for both hosting this important forum, as well as your continued support of our reform efforts in Togo. Fellow panelists and dear audience, I would like to share with you just 3 of the many challenges that most LDC's economies face. The first challenge that we face in Togo is the informal and low productivity activities. The second one is limited domestic market size and export of unprocessed raw material. The third, the economies are focused on capital-intensive activities with low job creation. But now I would like to give a positive outlook of the situation, even though I'm aware that we need to do a lot more. So in Togo, we are transitioning from a low productivity, limited export informal economy to a high productivity, export-oriented, job-intensive economy. So how do we do that? So we're targeting sectors, enablers, and investors. So targeting high potential sectors, enablers, and investors matters in LDCs more than anywhere else due to the limited fiscal and resources and due to limited state capacity. So we create the right enablers together with the private sector. The first step, we focus on human capital by reforming the education system. So in Togo, we have the IFAD, which are students are placed into a learning by training system to respond to the need of the job market, therefore responding to the need of all different investors. I would like to add that 75% of the population is under 35 years of age, which is great. So the logistic performance is the second enabler. Our port of Lomé is the 4th in Africa with its natural deep water. 70% of Lomé containers traffic is for transit, re-exportation, and transshipment, which makes us a logistic hub in Africa. We also focus on industrial infrastructure. I cannot help but to mention one recent example. It's the Adetikope Industrial Platform. It's called PIA. A partnership with the Arise Group, a 200 million PPP project that provides a conducive environment to industries and services. The fourth enabler that I would like to mention is the digital connectivity. Togo was the connection point to the Google Equiano cable in West Africa, a sign of confidence in our economy and a confirmation of our vision of digital transformation to create jobs. Major progress has been initiating economic transition with the Togolese states going beyond its traditional role. 2 weeks ago, I just mentioned the PIA industrial platform. We had our first shipment of garment made in Togo to the United States to one of the leading retail chains. The joint venture between the states and the private sector to set up a training center and country branding to convince brands to source from Togo. So now instead of seeing made in China in your children's garment, you'll probably see made in Togo. So the agriculture is also one of the, for 3 consecutive years, Togo has been the largest supplier of organic soybean to the European Union, so we're proud of that. BPO, business process outsourcing, with such a young and eager population, the sector has created thousands of jobs since 2019, convincing companies like the world leader in e-commerce and the world leader in ride-hailing to outsource customers' management services from Togo. To name a few, I can say that these are the milestones of our progress. We are now working on multi-sector development with resilient clusters, and above all, to create decent, sustainable jobs for our young people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now we will hear from the Minister of Energy and Transport from the Bahamas. That's Her Excellency Jobeth Lillian Colby Davis.
Thank you. First, I'd like to comment on the remarks by Secretary General Rebecca and Fatima, both that's very relatable, about the de-risking and putting in the correct infrastructure and the countries making the investment from the front end to attract the private sector investment and support from international organizations are very important and is key priority for the Bahamas. Also, I wanted to mention Fatima comments about connecting your investment or your goals to the SDGs to ensure that you're actually making sensible targets and transformation in your country is very important. I'll speak a little bit about what some of the concerns from the Bahamas. So the Minister of Energy and Transport, I was recently appointed as having energy under my portfolio. My background is from the oil sector. But one of the things that I noticed in the country as I transitioned was that our cost for energy is greatly connected to the reason why, as a government, we were not able to bring the cost of living down. And so it's become a huge priority for the Bahamas to make sure that our energy transformation is connected completely to the message of reducing the cost of living in country so that we can continue to support the way of life for our people. Now, in the Bahamas, we have been making advanced in changes in our legislation. We've implemented a procurement act which shows investors the exact process which we seek out to go through to ensure that their investment are protected and considered, and tendering process is transparent. We've also did transformation of our Bahamas Investment Authority to ensure that our investments are not just ideas, but actually connected to the needs of the country and our citizens, and connected to our national development plan of the Bahamas, so that we can ensure that we are responding to the needs of the country and the future of the Bahamas. We've also noticed a great deal of income and revenue we've taken in tourism. So we've continued to make large investments in our tourism product, because that's the one thing that the Bahamas has to brag about, and to be able to say that for the continuous years we have benefited greatly from tourism investment, and that continues to be a high priority. It brings in about 60% of our GDP, and so it's a great contributor to our economy. But we've noticed that even with making a lot of these changes, even with putting forward a lot of the implementation in our legislation, there continues to be, on the international level, in the global sector, a continuous movement of the goalposts. And so how does developing countries actually put themselves in the position where we get true, honest investment for what has been asked of us? We make the investment to de-risk. We make the investment to update our legislation. We make the investment to try our best. We've heard it from Botswana, Guinea, Togo, to make investors feel comfortable with doing business with our country, but yet still we are faced with the barrier that there is a certain level that we have not arrived at yet, because we've not reached a certain goalpost, and we are not the ones that are dictating when the goalpost is placed in the ground or where the goalpost has moved. And so that's one of the major concerns of the Bahamas, because that's really the greatest challenge that we have, is that we seem to sometimes not be able to catch up with the goalpost. We think we're doing enough for the international community, for the larger developed nations to trust us, to be able to come and invest in our country. And then we come to these forums and we hear, well, wait, hold on a second, there's a few more steps you have to take before we can actually be able to put that support behind you. We want to get to the place where there is a true, real effort and advocacy and push from the developed nations to actually invest in our country to help us for the investment to be because they truly want to help developing nations, and they want to help us move towards our SDG goals, to move towards making our commitments that we have done for to accommodate the Paris Agreement. We have said we want to arrive at decreasing our fossil fuels by 30% by 2030, so 30 to 30. But how do we get there? We need the developed countries to assist us. So the National Geographic put out a report in March of this year, and they stated that the Bahamas has the largest seagrass in the entire world. They're blown away by the data and the report. After their research, they saw it through satellite, but then they put cameras on sharks because they wanted to make sure what they were seeing was real. So we have what the developed nations need, because every time you look, there's new development. They're breaking this down, they're moving that down, they're moving that. And you need to balance it, because we have a risk that we can never remove from the Bahamas, is the fact that we're faced with constant natural disasters related to hurricane, which is completely connected to climate change effects that we unfortunately have the burden of bearing, but we're not the large contributors. So we have the carbon that you need to balance, right? So why don't we begin talking about debt forgiveness that you can do for countries like the Bahamas, SIDS that need the support, but may not be able to reach this goalpost that we keep hearing about, or that keeps moving. So let's begin to discuss ways that we can blend relationships based on the needs. Let's talk about ways that the developed nations begin to look at the small island, less developed, landlocked, as places what they see as needing the support but don't have the means to do it for themselves. So putting it as a part of their agenda, putting it as a part of their priority to make these conscious investments, not just investments that gives the profits. Of course you're going to get the profits, and no investor wants to invest and not be able to receive the profits, but talk about making conscious investments. Can we get to the conversation where we speak about a conscious move by developed nations, by private sector, where we sit to the table, we actually come to solutions. We move from these sort of roundtables and we get to a place where there's a dialogue on the next steps and the process for providing the investment. So what we're doing now in the Bahamas as relates to energy, we're trying to transition our energy infrastructure. We noticed that with the climate change, it's eating away of our coast, and a lot of our first initial investment for energy, for transmission and distribution and our grid was on the coast. It was just because we didn't have the real planning or the assistance of developed countries to say, well, maybe inland would be better, not knowing that climate change would come and catch us up as fast as it did. So the huge importance is resiliency of our grid, so that we be able to respond better during these natural disasters. And so support for energy infrastructure is a great importance for me, and being here at this conference. Support for our transition to renewable energy. I mean, as much as we hear about sun, sand, and seed in Bahamas, research shows that we only get about 5 hours of sun a day. So we have a lot of cloud, but definitely solar is still a great deal of support. Battery storage facilities is a great deal of support. Transition into LNG, so we're seeking to update our legislation related to LNG, renewables, and then obviously there are new and advanced technologies. We only learn them when we're able to come and speak to the developed nations, come to speak to these conferences and hear about what's the new and latest trends in energy. So putting us in a position where your investment can also help us to keep up with the change in times. And so that is the sort of conversation that we're looking to have, and we're delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be here to represent my country and to speak on what the real needs are, what the challenges are, and what we'd like to achieve ahead of COP28. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think it's very relevant that you mentioned about the national disasters and the climate crisis, and obviously many of the countries in the group that we're discussing are some of the most exposed to the climate crisis, and that creates an additional urgency in relation to many of the SDGs and climate finance and investment in environmental technologies and renewables. We'll hopefully get into that if we have time for a discussion. And now we move on to one of Bahamas' regional neighboring countries. And I'd like to invite His Excellency Vishnu Dhanpal, High Commissioner of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellencies, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to start, Madam Secretary General, with an observation. The grouping of countries as structurally weak and vulnerable developing economies is very unfortunate. This name for the group, in my opinion, elicits no hope, especially for promoting sustainable investment in these countries. Madam Secretary General, the parties or party responsible for this name, they should revisit it. According to the categorization, structurally weak and vulnerable economies, including the LDCs, landlocked developing countries, and SIDS. Let me use my country, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, classified as a small island developing state, to illustrate my point about the misnomer. Trinidad and Tobago lies just 6 miles off the coast of Venezuela. We are only 1,980 square miles, with a population of 1.4 million. However, Trinidad and Tobago, while small, to use a boxing analogy, punches way above its weight class in sports, culture, and of course, doing business. Madam Secretary General, I'm sure you're aware of our world-famous carnival, and I like to tell my Brazilian colleagues that I'm so happy that Brazil has the second best carnival in the world. For instance, Trinidad and Tobago is the only major energy exporting small island economy in the world. We have no peers. Obviously, this fact, and I stress the word democracy, and obviously this fact impacts directly in the way we conduct business. We also have a very solid Procurement Act, and the major word in that Procurement Act is transparency. Trinidad and Tobago is one of the world's largest producers of liquefied natural gas, methanol, ammonia, urea. We are investment grade status as determined by Standard & Poor's, BBB-, and by Moody's, Ba2, just one notch below investment grade. One of the few countries in Latin America and the Caribbean with similar credit ratings. Our per capita income is close to US $20,000. In our energy sector, we have been involved in the extraction of oil for over 150 years. And we have been monetizing our gas resources for decades. Many multinationals already have major plants in Trinidad and Tobago, including BP, Shell, and BHP, just to name a few, which indicates clearly the ease of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago. However, should an investor be interested in our non-energy sector, we have one metric that would be a major incentive in the fact that our electricity tariff is US 5 cents per kilowatt hour, 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Easily one of the lowest in the Western Hemisphere. This gives our well-developed manufacturing sector a major competitive advantage in not only the region, but globally. Although we are an energy-driven economy, we are committed to the Paris Agreement. As a result, BP, Shell, and our national gas company have embarked on a major solar project on the island of Trinidad. The plan is to generate 30% of our electricity needs by solar power by 2030. We are also in the final stage in the full implementation of a special economic zones regime. We'll have both designated zones and individual enterprise status. We also facilitate our nearshoring across all sectors. Madam Secretary General, I'd like to say a bit on probably a controversial topic, and that is the blacklisting of many small and vulnerable economies in the Caribbean by the Global Forum. Blacklisting simply makes vulnerable economies even more vulnerable and exposed to the vagaries of the international financial system. The inability to engage in correspondent banking activities, for example, can easily collapse the financial system of these blacklisted vulnerable countries. Let me quote from a press release of one of our CARICOM Caribbean neighbors, which was blacklisted just yesterday. And I quote, "The government notes that save for the listing of the Russian Federation, the European Union's Annex I list only contains small and vulnerable economies, yet fails to include any European Union member state." Let me repeat that. The government notes that save for the listing of the Russian Federation, the European Union Annex I list only contains small and vulnerable economies, yet fails to include any European member state which has received a partially compliant rating from the Global Forum on Tax Transparency and Exchange of Information. The release continues. The European Union listing process is devoid of the values of shared responsibility, mutual respect, accountability, fairness, and solidarity, which underpin our country's relation with the European Union and its member states. Trinidad and Tobago has been blacklisted and lumped as an offshore financial center. Madam Secretary General, we have never had an offshore financial sector in our history. And we are certainly not a tax haven. UNCTAD, and I'm not sure if this falls within the mandate of UNCTAD, but Madam Secretary General, you will agree that it is food for thought. Finally, for the interested parties, just last week, and this is in our energy sector, we launched our shallow water bid round. Our deep water bid round will be launched next year. Both bid rounds are accompanied by very attractive fiscal incentives. Thank you very much for inviting me once again.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you for being candid. We do need to tackle some controversial topics in such a discussion, so thank you. We have one more minister to give an address, and then I would like to give Madam Secretary General a chance to respond to anything that you've heard before we move. And yes, of course, Your Excellency, High Representative, we'll give you both a chance to respond to what you've heard, and then we will hear from our other participants. So our final minister to speak is the Minister for Entrepreneurship and Small Business Development at Dominica, another small island state, and that's Darren Pinard. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for the honor of being here this morning. I want to recognize Rebecca Fatima and Ms. Greenspan. I come from the island of Dominica, so I will start off by saying what Dominica is, where we are, and who we are. Dominica is a small island in the middle of the Caribbean, 756 square kilometers. We are known as the land of rivers. We have 365 rivers, so we have an abundance of water. 2/3 of our island remains covered by green, lush rainforests. We have a high biodiversity. We are known as the nature island of the Caribbean. We are a fun-loving people. We have the second largest boiling lake in the world. We have many waterfalls, lakes, rivers, high biodiversity. We have the only remaining indigenous population in the Caribbean, our Kalinago, and we are a very great place to visit. Now, following the tropical storm Erica in 2015 and Hurricane Maria in 2018, we have been on a mission to become the first climate resilient country in the world. We have endeavored to build back and build back better and more resilient. And the reconstruction efforts had continued and very costly, and then whilst we're in the middle of the reconstruction, we are then faced with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, building back and then having to spend the high cost of money to mitigate and to prevent and to control the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in an increase in our debt to GDP ratio from approximately mid 60% to 98%. However, we have continued to honor all our financial commitments to the International Committee throughout that. The government of Dominica did not lay off a single worker during all those things. We maintain our full staff, even when people had to sort of be followed, like work less than the full 5 days, they continue to receive their full salaries because we recognize their vulnerabilities, and they could not afford to get anything less. We continue to maintain our support to development of the small business, and we continued our support for youth and women and other vulnerable persons within our society. We continue to improve our health infrastructure. We built the China-Dominica Friendship Hospital, and we recently completed a new hospital in Marigot. We continued the construction of a number of health centers throughout the country. But as you can imagine, doing all these things and having to fund the recovery from the natural disasters and from COVID-19, this has taken a significant negative impact on our budget and our discretionary resources. So we are not always, if you have to look at the strict financial consideration in terms of GDP and IRR, we might not be at the top of the list. But what we want is for the rest of the world, the developed world, to not just look at us as IRRs and NPVs and so on when considering investing in our country. We need to take sometimes a softer approach. We need to look at a more humanitarian approach. We would ask the governments in the more developed countries to set the tone at the top, to be more considerate for the real challenges that countries like ours face. The representative from Trinidad and Tobago outlined some of the challenges with the blacklisting of our countries, these sort of draconian policies that often comes from countries seemingly without any consideration for the real factors on the ground. We make every effort to comply with all regulations, all requirements coming from the more developed countries, and yet we are the ones still being placed on blacklist and so on. We have very challenging corresponding banking requirements. Most of the major banks sometimes just decide it's easier not to do business with us. And that makes just doing regular business a challenge in our country. What we would ask is that the more developed countries generally act in a more timely manner when they have made commitments to help us, for example, in terms of recovering from any natural disasters. Help with the timeliness matters, because if the monies and the support do not come in a timely manner, then we have we are forced to try to fund it ourselves, and this in itself is not always affordable. We would ask you to look at non-financial considerations when looking at our countries for investment purposes. We would need to consider factors such as the carbon credits. We would need to give us, we would need to look at providing opportunities for technical support like training, especially in the new technologies like AI and so on. And we would really want the countries to stop shifting the goalposts on us all the time. So you set these requirements that we would need to have to maintain proper relationships, and as soon as we get there, then we have a new set of requirements, and we have a new set of challenges to try to meet those requirements. So it's sort of like we're always battling against the same thing. We would want to stop arbitrary sanctions against our peace-loving countries that, we are not a threat to anybody. We haven't got not a single bomb in Dominica or anywhere like that. We're not looking to cause any problem. We just want to live peaceful lives, be prosperous, So
We will need to wrap up in just one moment because
yes,
Madam Secretary General has to leave. But
from our
sorry.
own perspective, I would advise these small island developing states and the less developed countries, we need to start to work better together. We need to stop competing against each other. We are a tiny speck on the global stage, and I was looking at this cartoon just the other day, and we have this world map, and you have us and you have them, and then you start to go back out, and then when you go back far enough, you realizing that there is no difference between us and them. We are all just one people on this very small world. So we need to stop seeing ourselves as different, and we need to really come together and work together to improve our lives in general. Caribbean, we need to start to see ourselves as really and truly one single space. That is the only way we can succeed. There is a saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. It is very difficult for any small state to be able to prosper on its own. So the only way we can do it, the only way we can matter is if we combine our efforts and do it together.
We do need to wrap up. Sorry, we're running out of time. If you make your final comment.
Thank you for allowing me to make my contribution.
Thank you very much, and yes. Sorry to have to move on a bit. Madam Secretary General, what's your reaction to what you've heard so far?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I have to leave for the airport. But I want to say some tweets. First, you are absolutely right in the name. I will revise that. Let's see where it comes from. My second point is that there is this standard settings, norms, and that are being made outside our reality. And probably there has to be a more intense involvement of our voice in those negotiations, even in frameworks where we don't participate. That is part of the problem. Yes, the OECD decisions are not inclusive of our voices. But we at UNCTAD has done a lot of work on many of the impacts of these norms and standards or listing. And we will, with your help, support a stronger involvement and voice in trying to influence those decisions. We have done that with several of the decisions that are taken in these other frameworks and organizations. And we should continue, and maybe we should put them together, yes, because there are several. We were talking about precisely the rules or the bilateral policies that have been taken, for example, with respect to the environment. And in there, we have more than 100. And when we think about our, our private sector in our countries that have to deal with what I call the spaghetti ball of norms, it makes them, more unable to really be able to participate fully in the international markets. So it's true, and you refer to that, many of you refer to that. So I think that maybe we should try to put all that work that has been done for different policies together and try to make a stronger case of inclusivity and voice in many of those standard setting, listing, etc. My country has been also a victim of the listing in the EU. Yeah, so I know all about it, believe me. And so I think that a more inclusive and symmetric negotiation, because it's the asymmetry. What is, we are norms taken, not norms providers, yes? And so I take from all of you a lot of what has been said. The other thing is the whole issue of loss and damage, yes, and the natural disasters, and we hope that there will be an advance in the COP28 with respect to that. And it seems there is progress with respect to the small island developing states, but not with respect to the rest, and that is blocking a lot of the negotiations. So absolutely, we will continue to be involved in that conversation. The third one is the risk mitigation actions that can be taken at the international level also to strengthen what we have heard from the countries here of all the good work that has been done in terms of making the countries, suit for a different foreign direct investment and different involvement of the private, international private sector. And we are hearing around the forum about insurances and guarantees and action from the international financial architecture for risk mitigation, but we have also called for a different perception. Yes, because the risk perception with respect to our countries is biased. Yes, and I have said the market not necessarily allocates risk properly, and we have seen that in many other situations too. So how can we really have a system that we allocate risk properly? Because we are willing to work on the risk side, but we cannot work on the risk that doesn't exist but is perceived. And so also perceptions have to be part of the action, and we have been calling on the risk rating agencies to revise their methodologies, because many of them are being done without any real understanding of the national realities. Yes, and I think that you said, sir, that the regional context affects countries in ways that we don't even are part of. Yes, and so something happens in one country and it affects the risk perception of another that has nothing to do with that reality. And so that is something that has also to be dealt with. And my last point is with respect to carbon credits and the carbon markets that some of you have referred to. And I think that this continues to be a very important part of the mix that we need. I would have liked really to hear the private sector, and I know that Bertrand and Kerry have a lot to say in this. I have heard you before, and I am sure it will really enrich this discussion a lot in terms of what we can do, yes, to aggregate projects, to be able to direct more funds to the needs of the countries. Apart from what the international financial architecture can do, there is a lot to be done in the private sector part, and we want to be a partner for that to happen. So really, I'm sorry, I am being already called with urgency because my plane will leave me. No, won't wait. Not for me, at least. So, Rabab, thank you very much. You get everything here, please. And thank you, really thank you. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us and co-chairing this. So we do have 4 more speakers to get through, but I want to ask for your quick reaction, please, Ms. Fatima.
Thank you very much, Courtney. I know that we are running against time, and we still have 4 speakers, and they're all very, very important speakers. But very, very quickly to respond to some of what has been said around the table. And Ambassador, I can't agree more with you. I think the weak and vulnerable economies, I think that itself is a non-starter. Who will come to weak and vulnerable economies to invest? I think we certainly need to address that issue. But being the high representative for the LDCs, LLDCs, and the SITs, those 3 categories still remain. I mean, not necessarily meaning that they are the weakest, but they have their own vulnerabilities. And sometimes we have seen in the international system that we need to have those categorization in order to have targeted, dedicated support, including concessional funding. So I think that categorization perhaps will remain, especially to use those categorization to be able to receive special attention and special support. That's very important. Having said that, also to let you know that right now in the UN, we are undertaking an exercise to actually identify countries through multidimensional vulnerability index, the MVI. That exercise is almost complete. The final report has been submitted to the President of the General Assembly, and the PGA right now is from your own country, our very dear friend, and we have every hope that this process will come to a consensus, where we'll have broad political consensus to be able to operationalize and take forward the MVI to measure the vulnerability, and going beyond or complementing, if I may say so, the income criteria to judge vulnerability. And that will be looking at also social, economic, as well as environmental vulnerabilities. So I think that's very, very important, and I hope that will also remain one of the important ways to measure our countries. But having said that, from what I've heard from all of you ministers, I think it's an important takeaway that I take from here from all of you. You have expressed very deep, strong political commitment to put in place the right conditions, the right environment to attract foreign direct investment. And I think that's first and foremost what is important. Foreign investors will only come in if you have the right laws, the right regulations, the right environment. And I think that's very important. I think Minister from Botswana, Minister, you also mentioned about political stability. I think that's critically important. Regional stability, in order to, people are coming with money, they will have to have that stability, and I think that's very, very important. But I think it's a coalition also. I mean, national governments on the one way, but, international investors, the private sector, your development partners, ODA partners, everybody, the UN system, regional organization, everybody. I think it has to be a coalition of partners which will, in the first place, be able to attract the investment that you need. And I think it's very, very important. ODA is shrinking. Overall global resource situation, fund situation doesn't look good. So in that context, I think you'll have to build your own capacity, and that can be done only through investment in business. And that is why we have placed so much emphasis on attracting investment. The Doha Program of Action has a very practical, ambitious solution. It has actually recognized that the LDCs may not have the capacity to be able to attract investment. So there is now a call to look at the feasibility of having an international investment support center. So we are looking at that. And that will be, of course, supporting directly the LDCs, but also graduating LDCs like your country, Madam Minister. That's very, very important, and that's something that we'll be taking forward. And I see as the upcoming LLDCs conference, Minister, in Kigali next year, as well as the SIDS conference in the Caribbean region next year, to be also very important opportunities for you, those two groups of countries, recognizing your unique challenges and also the opportunities to come up with practical ways on how we can attract foreign direct investment. So we will be looking at that. We also have the Technology Bank for the LDCs. That's also a very important institution that is also contributing to supporting the capacity of the LDCs to attract investment. So we'll hear from the managing director very soon. But I hope that the SIDS and the LLDCs will take the opportunity next year to also come up with very practical, tangible outcomes. I think that is very, very important. And finally, if I may say so, for the SIDS, we have something called the SIDS Global Business Network. And in preparation for the SIDS conference next year, we are hoping to have the SGBN, the SIDS Global Business Network meeting in the Bahamas, possibly in March. And the preparatory meeting is actually going to take place next month in New York. So these are immense opportunities for us to still rally the right level of support. And given the high political commitment and determination that I've heard from all of you around the table, I think we need to get that narrative out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, with thanks for your patience, I'd like to give the floor to Kerry Adler, founder, president, and CEO of the Sky Group Power of Companies. What do you make of what you've heard so far, and where is the private sector in all of this?
Thank you, and Your Excellencies, you know, this year I celebrate 20 years in renewables, and I think this is probably one of the most honest conversations that I've heard from Your Excellencies in terms of the challenges you face. And I will be brief in regards to allowing others to speak as well. But I want to share with you that this belief that foreign direct investment is challenging is a myth. It is absolutely a myth. Climate change has its challenges, but it also has a silver lining. The silver lining is that the urgency and the need to move away from fossil fuels, not entirely, that will never happen, but to work through transition to renewables. Each and every one of you, and I looked because I was so curious, with the exception of Trinidad that already enjoys very favorable electricity prices, but Botswana, 9.3 cents in US dollar terms average to businesses and consumers, Togo 18.6, Bahamas 35.6, Laos 13 cents, Guinea 15 cents, and Dominica 20 cents. Do you know the opportunity that you have in front of you? Solar energy, solar, should not be more than 6 to 8 cents. You know, power is power. Power gives the ability to create jobs. Power gives the ability to educate, to drive industry. The two most expensive costs of running a business, manufacturing, a service, anything, is people and power. Unfortunately, today, power is overcoming the cost of people. Solar energy, which is what Sky Power has been doing 20 years, is the lowest cost of power in the world. Like I said, you should not be paying more than 6 to 8 cents per unit of electricity. It is also the greatest creator of jobs. It is the greatest economic stimulus. 1,000 megawatts is the equivalent of 34,000 job years. We engaged Deloitte to take 24 regions of the world and conduct socioeconomic studies. On average, 1,000 megawatts is 34,000 job years. Economic impact of $4 billion US dollars to the GDP. The other beautiful thing about renewable energy is it's inflation-proof. The price is fixed. The life of a solar panel is 30, 35 years. You know, 20 years ago when I started in renewables, no one wanted to sign PPAs. Then they started doing 10 years. Then they did 15. We pioneered 20, and now we've pioneered 30 years. There's many companies like us around the world that want to invest. You know, I came to this region, I now live in the UAE for one reason, because I want to be closer to the markets where we can make a difference. You are all blessed with the greatest resource, the most reliable resource the world has known. Interannual variation in the sun is a couple percentage points. Unlike hydro, where you could suffer 10, 12%, some countries are blessed with hydro today, and years later they have none. Companies like us will come to your country. As long as you live up to the rules of anti-corruption, by the most stringent of standards, there's transparency. We work only under the regime of public-private partnerships, profit sharing. We don't want the government to do anything but buy the power and assure us we're going to get paid. So, you know, in Africa today, it is the lowest rate of failure in terms of payment for energy. Why? Because people need power. The opportunity is so great. And the reason that foreign direct investment in your country is believed to be difficult as a myth is because if we invested our funds into US projects or Canadian projects or into OECD markets, we're only going to see 6 to 8% returns. But given the power of the sun, where you are each located, we can enjoy risk-adjusted returns and still give you lower prices than you'll pay today and ensure that you can use that price of power to attract the manufacturers and the businesses tomorrow. Power is power. I believe that you can take this opportunity to seize renewable energy and help bring your countries to the forefront of the next generation. So this is the last generation and it has to pay 20, 30 cents for power. Give them a future. This is an incredible opportunity to do that. And in the wake of climate change, and there can't be a COP29. We're in Somaliland. We're in the DRC. We're in Zambia, Zimbabwe. We're building in Nigeria, in South Africa. We're building in the most challenging countries in the world, and we're prepared to invest more because we believe that on a risk-adjusted basis, we rather spend our time delivering new power than trying to convince coal-powered or fuel-powered countries that they should change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think a few here probably quite excited and inspired by what you had to say of the opportunities. Thank you. And now I'd like to invite Bertrand Badre, Managing Partner and Founder of Blue Like an Orange Sustainable Capital.
Thank you very much. In fairness, yes, it's been one of the most honest conversations we've had and one of the few optimistic speech I've heard. Thank you very much, Kerry. But I think renewable energy is also a specific case. I think that's important, but it's a crucial one. And what is difficult with the situation we are facing, so Blue Like an Orange, I created Blue Like an Orange after I left the World Bank, where I spent 3.5 years as managing director to invest in sustainable development in emerging and developing economies, starting in Latin America and now moving to Africa. So I'm confronted to what we've been discussing this morning every day. So the situation is not great, despite what my neighbor just said, to which I concur actually. It's not great despite the emergency of the situation, despite the opportunities that are everywhere. So on the rational side, it should be okay. On the perception and reality side, it's not. And it's even worse because I believe that we have tremendous headwinds facing us. The domestic possibilities that you all have are under pressure. The international public flows, it's been said, are diminishing. And the private flows as well are diminishing. And there are many reasons why they come under pressure. First, interest rates. We've never mentioned the interest rate, but interest rates are rising. This has a number of impacts. One of them being that for investors in OECD countries, they prefer to stack their money at home rather than to take a risk elsewhere. I mean, if you can get 5% with US Treasury, why the hell would you go in a country which is more difficult? That satisfies your pension requirements or your savings requirements. You have also industrial policy. I mean, the IRA and the Green Deal requires a lot of savings to stay home. And more importantly for me, and it's very difficult to figure out, but that's what I'm feeling every day when I discuss with people, we have a shrinking of the horizon. I believe a growing number of people don't want their money, don't want their preoccupation to move too far away from home. They say we have enough problem in France, we have enough problem in Germany, we have enough problem in the US, why do we care about the rest of the world? And that, I think, probably is the most challenge, the biggest challenge we are facing. So I think that we have had this conversation many times, but I think it's getting more and more pressing and more true. And I think we should avoid to avoid having this conversation next year under the same terms, two things. First is we have to stop to do more of the same. I've had this conversation many times when I was a representative of the World Bank as a G7, G20, etc. It's not just putting more money in the same system. That is not working. I've had many, for instance, discussion on blended finance. Let's do it. I mean, it remains minuscule. We have to stop also the not inventory here. Everybody wants to have his own program, his own little nice things, thousands of mosquito bites. We have to cooperate. And we have to do it for serious. There is no silver bullet, I believe. I think we have to do a joint efforts, and it requires to work along 4 axes. And I share the concern that have been said at the national level. You do a lot of things. One of the issues is the change of the goalpost. That's absolutely true. I've heard that many times, and I'm seeing that. And it's very difficult for me because I'm intermediating between investors and you, and the investors have their own pressure. It's a long chain of responsibilities or irresponsibilities. So I think you have, of course, to stick to your conducive business environment. I think, unfortunately, perception matters. I mean, you can do whatever you want. The world is not fair, and it's very sad. So we have to work on that, and it's taking a lot of time to dissipate and to change. But I think we also have to change in depth the international financial system. I've been in charge of the World Bank for several years. It's true that we need a bigger bank. I wrote the report from billions to trillions, and it remains true. But I think we need also a better bank. We have to write the report from trillions to millions. Because it's not the fact that you give money to the World Bank and others that will change this. And that's extremely difficult. I think it's working on tools, it's working on the culture. Let's make this a priority. Let's face it, developing the private sector is not a priority, full stop, in none of these institutions. Everybody believes that FDI and private sector development is a side product of development. For me, it's the heart of development. So we have to put a focus on that, and that requires a real change of culture. The private sector, and again, there are a number of exceptions in some sectors, but the reality is that we have these perception issues which require us to work on the risk. And even if the risk is miscalculated, it is a fact. We have to put in public, and this is a big discussion on making public the databases of the international systems, the GEMS discussion, to make sure that what is the real risk of investing in Africa. I share your view. The real risk is way lower than the perceived risk, and you pay twice. And you will not instruct rating agencies to change their methodology. It's not working this way. So we have to work on this, and we also have to facilitate the private sector involvement, to earmark things. This is a good SDG product. This is a nice one. You qualify, etc. They don't know where to go, actually, except when they have people like my neighbor. So I think it's important also that we basically, I checked, I was working with James on the Paris summit that President Macron convened. I checked in no G7 or OECD country, I believe there is an association of investors in emerging and developing economies. There is no voice to say, oh, this is what we need. So it's again, the level of investment from Europe is less than 4% of European AUM goes to emerging and developing economies. So I don't know the share of the vulnerable country in this 4%. It's minuscule, and it's less than 2% in the US. So there is no real interest in doing all of this. And the last point is really to address seriously the question of norms. I think there are the well-known norms, you've discussed them. You have the growing, let's call it the ESG, I mean everything. But you also have the Basel III and Solvency II. For the same rating, if you invest in an OECD country and in non-OECD country for an equivalent rating agency rating, it costs you twice as much capital if you invest in a non-OECD country. So there might be some reasons for that, but we have to recognize this. The way finally the OECD recognized that providing guarantees was eligible to ODA. It took us decades to get there. So we really have to work on all these things, and we have to be sure that, as you say, you are not norms taker. I mean, everybody should enjoy the norms. It's not us versus them, etc. And I think it's very important. I'm urging Europe to stop producing norms without engaging with the rest of the world, because it makes my life extremely difficult. It's not just the tax haven or whatever. There are some issues. I mean, let's face it, there are some issues. But for me, it's tough because whenever I want to put an investment somewhere, I have to check so many things to see whether they're okay or not. And in case of doubt, be sure that the doubt does not benefit the investment. So here again, I think we have really to mark a sense of urgency to join forces. I really don't want to come back next year and the year after and discuss the same thing. I've heard you. I think the level of anger and resentment is growing, and rightly so. So what can we do? We have to join forces, and we have to really make this work. We have to basically anchor what my neighbor says. There are things which demonstrate it's doable. Let's expand this. It's not just in energy, it's in other sectors. But for me, it's critical that we change the narrative and that we all agree that there is reality, an urgency, an opportunity, and not just more talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you as well for your candor and the passion with which you're speaking. So we are clearly running a little bit over. We started late, so we are going to add some minutes here. Deep apologies to Mia Seppo and to Tess, because you are the last two speakers, which means you will have to be very concise. But we do want to hear from you. And so first I will give the floor to Mia Seppo, Assistant Director General of the International Labour Organization.
Thank you, Moderator, Excellencies, High Representative, ladies and gentlemen. The ILO is fully committed to supporting LDCs in achieving the Doha Programme of Action through practical labour market solutions. I have listened very carefully to all the interesting statements made, and I do think that there is room for optimism. ILO recognizes the significant potential of LDCs to take advantage of the shift to greener economies, giving their expanding youthful population and abundant natural resources. The increase in demand for critical minerals for the transition towards greener economies opens new opportunities for mineral-rich developing countries, including LDCs. I echo your concern, High Representative. There is indeed the need for retaining more of the value, added value of these minerals in order for these to be transformative, and this will require significant investment, adequate policies, and skilled labor force. So in other words, the people and the power, with an emphasis on people. So skills development can open the way to apply new technologies, develop new markets, and create sustainable and decent jobs. New types of skills will be demanded in markets focused on green economies and to capture more of the added value of critical minerals. Success will require the right employment and macroeconomic policy measures that will help create jobs in both existing and new sectors, enhance productivity, and drive innovation. And this obviously includes bridging the digital gap that was referred to earlier. And really focus on green skills for entrepreneurs and green skills for young people. Investments, in particular in green and digital economic opportunities, will be critical for this process of transformation. This includes investment in updating vocational education and training and apprenticeship systems, not only to attract new needed capital, but also because foreign investors can play an important role in helping countries modernize curricula and delivery of training. So in other words, narrowing that skills mismatch that many LDCs are facing. Let me just remind you again of the ILO's tripartite declaration of principles concerning multinational enterprises and social policy as guidance to both government and enterprises, and also guidance on how to maximize the benefit of FDI. And also remind you in terms of norm setting that this is agreed to and arrived at through a tripartite process involving governments, workers, and employments, therefore having a kind of different starting point in terms of that norm setting agenda. I want to refer back to what UNCTAD Secretary General mentioned in terms of our long-standing partnership with UNCTAD, UNIDO, and WIPA to support investment promotion agencies in attracting FDI that contribute to the SDGs. And note that we are developing additional tools for LDC IPAs in particular. Let me conclude by going back to skills, and we can obviously make available the full statement as well, to really note that skills is an enabler for transitions, be that green, digital, or demographic and aging societies, which faces another part of the world. And also note that skills is the buffer to remain competitive and relevant in a rapidly changing world of work. Let me close by joining the recognition of the importance of aligning investment to the SDG aligned sectors, which has been referred to by the High Representative and a number of speakers, including the call for action by the UNCTAD Secretary General, and really emphasize the need to invest in human development, in human capital, in decent work, and extending social protection. At the end of the day, it's people who carry these transitions, and it's people that turn the structurally weak and vulnerable economies from that categorization to places of hope and determination. And we are here to be part of that effort in partnership with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and apologies you had to abridge your intervention a bit, but great to have your perspective. And finally, and thank you very much for your patience, we have Mr. Tafer Tesfaciu, who said I can call him Tess, as he's known, and he's the acting managing director of the UN Technology Bank for LDCs.
Thank you very much. I think the advantage of being the last to speak is that most of the important things have been said, so there's very little I can add. But since you gave me a chance, it was in the little time I have, let me say a few words. I represent the UN Technology Bank for least developed countries. I'm the acting managing director. The least developed countries, as you know, the 46 countries, 33 of them in Africa, altogether 46, 9 in Asia, and about 15 of them now in different stage of graduation, most of them in Asia. So in about 6, 7, 8 years' time, the LDC story is going to be an African story. So this is really very much an African story even at the moment. The purpose of the Technology Bank is to assist these countries to develop their science, technology, innovation capabilities by transferring technology. Now, an important channel for transfer technology, as you know, is FDI. In fact, the motivation for attracting FDI is not only capital, but also transfer of the know-how, the technology, skills, and managerial and other type of skills that FDI brings with it, in the hope that through spillover, through linkage, that this knowledge will be transferred. That is at least the expectation. It works in some countries, it does in others. But unfortunately, as we heard, FDI inflow to this group of countries, the 46, very, very low. 1.6% of global FDI flows goes to these countries. In fact, the latest figure supposed to be higher is only $26 billion. There are 46 countries, represent 14% of the global population, and range from countries as large as Bangladesh with 170 million population, although Bangladesh is now graduating from LC category, and smaller ones like Tuvalu is only 11,800. So they're a diverse group of countries. Now, the good news here is that this group of countries the last 2 decades have been liberalizing their investment policy, regulatory framework. That's very good because there is recognition of the importance of attracting FDI. As low-income countries, as you can imagine, saving capacity is low, so domestic investment is very low, and they rely heavily on ODA and remittances and FDI, since it comes with, as I said, with other goodies like technology and skills and so on. Attracting FDI is very important. So they've been liberalizing, which is good news. They've been setting up international investment policy agencies. The institutional capacity of these agencies differ between countries, but at least they have that. And importantly, there has been signs of diversification from total reliance on extractive sector. A lot of the FDI goes to extractive sector, which is a problem because there is very little value addition And the foreign companies come, they extract these minerals and they export it. And the revenue usually, especially if you have governance problem, doesn't go to where it should go. That's why performance in SDG is very, very poor. So all this is really good, but unfortunately, as we said, very little FDI is going, and they are being advised to direct FDI towards SDG-related activities. As Bernard was saying, sometimes that's also very confusing because there are so many goals and areas. So let me, by finishing, say the following. For some time, UNCTAD has been consistently arguing that the root cause of the challenges and underdevelopment of LDCs is their limited development of their productive capacity. Productive capacity is defined the diverse competencies and capabilities that countries need to be able to produce a wide range of goods and services that they either consume domestically or export competitively. Actually, ultimately, it's a development product capacity that distinguishes developed from developing countries and separates countries that can have resilience to get out of crisis and move forward, and those that are stuck in low value production and poverty trap. So building product capacity is very important. And the good thing is that UNCTAD has developed a framework identifying the key ingredients that will help you develop the product capacity. There are 8 of them. They range from natural capital to human capital, structural change, institutions, private sector development, transport, ICT. Now, the good thing about this is that then countries will be able to see where the gaps are in the development of their product capacity, and they can then direct the investment into this sector. Energy is, for example, one of them. So like Kerry was saying, the opportunity is there, the potential is there. So if they could identify that the weakness in their product capacity is because of their high cost of energy, then the opportunity is there to attract the type of investment that will help them have electricity at a lower value. So I think this could help as a framework, in my view, because the countries that will achieve SDGs are the ones that have developed their productive capacity. We talk about investing in health. If you want to improve health, have productive capacity development, because only developed countries that will have the capacity for sanitation, avoid malnutrition, have various services that you need to improve health.
We will need to wrap up. Okay. I'm so sorry.
Ultimately, what I want to say is that the SDG, which is really something that universally accepted, an international community objective, 2030 is approaching. In 7 years' time, we're going to all gather in New York to see how the world has done in terms of SDGs. Now, the principle that guides SDGs is leaving no one behind. That means by 2030, if there are countries that are not achieving SDGs, then the whole international community has not achieved SDGs. So the battleground where the SDG will be lost or won will be in this group of countries because they are left behind. So unless they get the investment, they will remain behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And again, I'm very sorry to have had to rush you through. Thank you all. I won't say very much in the way of concluding remarks because we have run a little bit late. So thank you for your patience, actually, and to all of our speakers for sharing your insights. Thank you for the audience, both here and joining us, watching us live on UNTV. I appreciate the opportunity to moderate this session. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Rabab Fatima, for being co-chair and host and for being so active in this discussion. Thank you, Your Excellencies and honorable ministers, our multilateral partners and representatives, and of course, our private sector representatives. Thank you for actually your listening to all of this and joining our discussion. And I wish you all a successful rest of the forum. That's me concluding.